The 1970s gave us some of the biggest hits in music history. But, believe it or not, a few of those classics actually stumbled out of the gate. One slow-burning soul groove in our mid-list almost disappeared completely. And wait until you hear the shocking comeback story near the top. These are the flop songs that rose from the ashes and conquered the charts. Number 15, Me and Mrs. Jones by Billy Paul.
Mrs. Jones.
The slow burn scandal that refused to fade. When this Philadelphia soul masterpiece first appeared in 1972 on Philadelphia International Records, it was not an instant explosion. Billy Paul was already respected in jazz and soul circles, but this lush, dramatic ballad took time to find its audience.
To let it go now.
Radio programmers were initially cautious. After all, the song's storyline about an illicit affair was bold for its time, and some stations hesitated to give it heavy rotation. Behind the scenes, producers Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff believed deeply in the record's emotional pull.
We both know that it's wrong, but it's much too.
They leaned into the sophisticated arrangement, letting those silky strings and Paul's conversational phrasing do the heavy lifting. Slowly but surely, listeners began to connect with the honesty and grown folk storytelling. You can almost feel the dim glow of a late-night living room, the needle dropping softly as couples lean closer to the speaker.
And talk with you at the same place, the same cafe.
By the time momentum built, the song surged to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the defining soul records of the decade. But that was just the beginning of our comeback stories, because the next track took a very different road from early disappointment to dance floor domination. Number 14, Le Freak by Chic. Disco chant that labels almost rejected. When Chic brought Le Freak to Atlantic Records in 1978, the response was surprisingly lukewarm. Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards had crafted what they knew was a groove monster, but early industry reactions were cautious. Some executives were not convinced the chant-driven hook would translate beyond the dance floor. Even early radio play started slowly, and the record did not explode out of the gate the way many now assume. The story goes that the song itself was born out of frustration after the duo were famously turned away from Studio 54. That sting turned into creative fuel, and what started as a private joke evolved into one of disco's most infectious bass lines. Once DJs began spinning the track heavily in clubs, momentum shifted fast. Picture mirrored disco balls spinning overhead, polyester shimmering under colored lights, and that bass line pulling everyone to their feet. By the time the public caught on, Le Freak stormed to number 1 and became Atlantic's biggest selling single at the time. And if that was disco determination, the next song on our list proves that sometimes the quietest ballads make the loudest comebacks. Number 13, Let's Stay Together by Al Green.
So in love with you.
The Memphis slow jam that almost slipped by. When this silky masterpiece arrived in late 1971 on High Records, it did not immediately explode the way its legacy might suggest today. Al Green was still building his national profile, and early radio response was steady but far from overwhelming. In a musical landscape crowded with louder, flashier releases, this gentle plea for lasting love had to earn its moment the slow way. Behind the scenes at Royal Studios in Memphis, producer Willie Mitchell knew they had captured something special. The arrangement was intentionally restrained, letting Green's tender falsetto glide over those warm horn lines and that unmistakable groove.
Would you, baby?
But some early industry voices wondered if the song was simply too smooth to break through quickly. Listeners, however, had other plans. As word spread, the record began climbing steadily. You can almost feel couples swaying in dimly lit living rooms, the song turning ordinary evenings into something intimate and unforgettable.
As long as I can hold you, baby, yeah.
By early 1972, it reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became Al Green's signature anthem. And speaking of slow burners, the next comeback story started even more quietly before lighting up the entire decade. Number 12, I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor.
Petrified, kept thinking I could never live without you by my side.
The anthem that started on the B-side. When Gloria Gaynor recorded this now immortal disco statement in 1978 for Polydor Records, it was never meant to be the star. In fact, the label originally pushed another song, Substitute, as the A-side.
Walked in to find you here with that sad look upon your face. I should have changed that.
I Will Survive was tucked away on the flip, almost treated like an afterthought. Early radio play reflected that decision, and for a brief moment, one of the most empowering songs of the decade seemed destined to stay in the shadows. But something magical happened in the clubs. DJs, especially in New York, began flipping the record over and spinning the B-side instead.
All my loving for someone who's loving me. Go on now, go.
The emotional punch of Gaynor's vocal, paired with that dramatic build, hit audiences in a way that executives had clearly underestimated. You can almost see the dance floor filling, people lifting their heads a little higher as that opening piano line kicks in. Momentum built fast.
All my life to live. I've got all my love to give. Now survive.
By early 1979, the song rocketed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a global resilience anthem that still echoes today. And if you think that comeback story was surprising, the next track on our list had an even stranger journey to chart glory. Number 11, Superstition by Stevie Wonder. The funk classic that almost went elsewhere. When Stevie Wonder cut Superstition in 1972 for Tamla, few outside the studio realized just how close this song came to taking a completely different path. The track was originally part of a creative trade. Guitarist Jeff Beck was supposed to release his own version first. For a brief moment, it looked like Wonder's recording might not even be the one that defined the song. Early on, the single did not explode instantly. Radio needed a moment to catch up to the song's raw, clavinet-driven funk.
You believe in things you don't understand.
But once programmers leaned in, the groove proved impossible to resist. Wonder was entering the most creative stretch of his career, and you can hear that fearless energy in every bar. Picture car radios buzzing in city streets, that opening riff snapping listeners to attention like a jolt of electricity. By early 1973, the record shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the most recognizable funk tracks ever pressed to vinyl. And if that was a near-miss turned legend, the next song on our list had to fight even harder just to be heard. Number 10, Ain't No Stopping Us Now by McFadden and Whitehead.
There's been so many things that's held us down, but now
The Philly groove that radio slept on. When this uplifting anthem arrived in 1979 on Philadelphia International Records, it did not immediately roar out of the gate. McFadden and Whitehead were better known behind the scenes as hit-making writers and producers for the Philly Soul Machine.
go, and where we'll end up, I don't know.
As performers, they were still proving themselves, and some radio programmers were slow to fully embrace the record in its early weeks. But Gamble and Huff knew exactly what they had. Built on that rolling bass line and those triumphant horns, the song carried the same polished optimism that defined the Philadelphia sound.
To every word I say,
Once DJ started giving it real rotation, audiences connected fast. The message felt bigger than the moment. You can almost picture roller rinks glowing under soft lights, couples skating in rhythm as the chorus lifted the whole room.
Don't you let nothing
By mid-1979, the record climbed to #1 on the R&B chart and crossed over strongly to pop audiences, becoming one of the era's ultimate feel-good anthems. And coming up next, the story gets even more surprising, because the next smash hit on our list nearly disappeared before the public ever got the chance to fall in love with it. Number 9, Best of My Love by The Emotions. The feel-good hit that took its sweet time. When The Emotions released this radiant groove in 1907 on Columbia Records, few expected it to become the runaway smash it eventually did. The group had already built a solid reputation in soul circles, but early momentum for the single was surprisingly modest. Radio picked it up gradually, rather than all at once, and for a moment, it looked like the record might settle into quiet success instead of full-blown domination. Behind the boards, Maurice White of Earth, Wind and Fire helped shape the track's bright, buoyant energy. The layered harmonies were pure sunshine. But some programmers initially wondered if the song was too smooth to compete with the harder-edged funk dominating parts of the dial. Listeners quickly proved otherwise. You can almost feel car windows roll down on warm summer afternoons, that joyful chorus floating through neighborhood streets. Once the public locked in, the climb was unstoppable. The song hit #1 on both the Billboard Hot 100 and R&B charts, becoming the group's signature hit. And if that was pure feel-good magic, the next comeback story on our list comes wrapped in even deeper late-night soul. Number 8, Sideshow by Blue Magic. The quiet ballad that snuck up on everybody. When Blue Magic released Sideshow in 1974 on Atco Records, it did not burst onto the charts with fireworks. In fact, early response was surprisingly muted for a record this emotionally rich.
Stand in line, get your tickets.
The group was still relatively new to national audiences, and radio programmers were not immediately convinced that such a soft, theatrical ballad would break through in a market leaning toward funkier, more upbeat material. Behind the scenes, producer Norman Harris helped craft that signature Philadelphia soul elegance.
What life has done to those like you and me.
Lead singer Ted Mills delivered the vocal with almost conversational heartbreak, but the song's slow tempo meant it had to grow on listeners rather than grab them instantly. You can almost picture a lonely late-night DJ letting the record spin in a quiet studio.
Only love she ever had.
The room glowing dim while that opening line floated through the speakers. Slowly but surely, audiences leaned in. By mid-1974, the single climbed into the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a cornerstone of Philly soul balladry. And coming up next, the momentum shifts again, because the next record on our list turned early doubt into pure dance floor electricity. Number 7, Rock the Boat by the Hughes Corporation.
Oh, I'd like to know when you got the notion. Said I'd like
The yacht party that radio almost missed. When this breezy groove first surfaced in 1973 on RCA Records, it did not arrive with the force of a guaranteed hit. The Hughes Corporation were not yet household names, and early radio support was modest at best.
this like a ship on the ocean. We've been sailing.
In fact, the single initially hovered without major impact, and for a brief moment, it looked like this smooth summer record might simply drift away. Producers John Flores and Perry Botkin Jr. had built something deceptively powerful.
Don't rock the boat, baby. Rock the boat.
The rhythm felt light and carefree, but some early programmers underestimated its crossover appeal. It was not until dance floors and regional stations started giving it real spin that the tide began to turn.
The boat, baby. Rock the boat. Don't tip the boat over. Rock the boat. Ooh.
You can almost see sunlit pool parties, wide lapels swaying, and that irresistible groove pulling people out of their chairs. Momentum built week by week until the song surged all the way to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1974. If that was Smooth Sailing Soul, the next track on our list hits with a deeper emotional punch that few listeners were prepared for. Number 6, Love Train by the OJs.
Love train, the next stop that we made.
The unity anthem that gathered steam slowly. When the OJs released Love Train in late 1972 on Philadelphia International Records, it did not immediately roar out of the station. Despite the group's growing reputation and the powerhouse production of Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, early radio response was steady rather than explosive.
And let this train keep on riding, riding on.
Program directors were still catching up to the full emotional pull of the record. Inside Sigma Sound Studios, the team knew they had captured lightning. The rolling rhythm, the sweeping strings, and Eddie Levertt's commanding vocal created a message that felt bigger than the moment.
Listen, I feel sorry for you.
Still, it took persistent airplay and word of mouth for the song to truly catch fire across the country. You can almost picture crowded living rooms and packed dance floors, people pointing and singing along as each city name rolled by. Once momentum kicked in, the climb was unstoppable. By early 1973, the record reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the decade's defining unity anthems. If these 70s classics are bringing back memories, give this video a thumbs up. It helps us keep the soul alive. And stay with us, because the biggest comeback stories are still ahead. But trust me, what's coming next took an even more surprising road to immortality. Number 5, Car Wash by Rose Royce. The soundtrack smash that started slow. When Car Wash rolled out in 1976 on MCA Records, few predicted it would become one of the defining grooves of the decade. Rose Royce were essentially a brand new act, assembled by producer Norman Whitfield for the Car Wash film soundtrack.
Let me tell you, it's better than digging a ditch.
Early radio reaction was cautious. Soundtrack singles did not always translate into standalone hits, and some programmers were unsure whether this quirky, rhythm-heavy track had true staying power. Whitfield, however, trusted the groove. Recorded at Whitfield Records in Los Angeles, the track leaned into everyday imagery and street-level funk in a way that felt refreshingly real.
Ain't no place to be if you plan on being a star. Let me tell you, it's always.
But momentum built gradually, not overnight. Club DJs were among the first to recognize its pull, giving the record the early spins it needed. You can almost hear the hum of city traffic and see workers moving in rhythm as that unmistakable bass line kicks in.
Give us a play.
Once mainstream radio caught up, the floodgates opened. Car Wash climbed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a cultural staple. And coming up next, the story gets even more dramatic, because the next smash on our list nearly vanished before listeners had the chance to fall in love with it. Number 4, Don't Leave Me This Way by Thelma Houston. The cover that outshined the original. When Thelma Houston stepped into the studio in 1976 for Motown, This song already had a history. Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes had recorded an earlier version.
Won't you understand? I'm at your command.
But Houston's take was not immediately treated like a guaranteed blockbuster. Early radio response was measured, and some programmers viewed it as just another disco-era remake trying to find its footing.
So come on now, let's do what you gotta do.
Producer Hal Davis believed otherwise. He pushed the arrangement toward the dance floor, building that dramatic intro into one of the most explosive vocal entrances of the decade. Even so, the single needed club momentum before radio fully committed.
Only your good loving can set me free.
DJs were the first to recognize the electricity in Houston's performance. You can almost see packed dance floors under swirling lights, the crowd waiting for that moment when her voice finally bursts through the speakers. Once it clicked, the record moved fast. By 1967, it hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of Motown's biggest late-decade triumphs. And if you think that comeback was powerful, the next track on our list has one of the most unlikely rise to the top stories of the entire 1970s. Number 3, Reunited by Peaches and Herb.
Such a lonely ride, the breaker.
The comeback nobody saw coming. By the time this tender duet arrived in 1978 on Polydor Records, Peaches and Herb were already considered a nostalgia act by many in the industry. The duo had enjoyed earlier success in the 1960s, but few expected them to storm back onto the charts a decade later.
Be mine, hey,
I can't go cheating.
Early buzz around the single was polite rather than electric, and some radio programmers initially treated it like a pleasant throwback instead of a major contender. Producers Freddie Perrin and Dino Fakaris knew better. They built the track with patience, letting that gentle piano intro and warm vocal chemistry do the emotional heavy lifting. Still, the song's soft approach meant it had to grow organically with listeners rather than explode overnight.
This is solid love.
and
You can almost picture slow dances at school gyms and couples swaying under soft lights as the chorus wrapped around the room. Word spread quietly but steadily. Then the surge came. Reunited climbed all the way to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1979 and became one of the decade's defining love songs. And now we are getting very close to the top, because the next record on our list shocked the industry even more when it refused to stay down. Number 2, You're So Vain by Carly Simon.
Party like you were walking onto a yacht.
The mystery hit that kept climbing. When Carly Simon released this biting pop soul crossover in late 1972 on Elektra Records, early expectations were strong but not explosive. Simon was respected as a singer-songwriter.
It's about you, don't you, don't you?
Yet few predicted just how deeply this sharply written track would cut through the noise of the era. Initial airplay built gradually, and the song's conversational bite made some stations slow to fully embrace it at first. Behind the scenes, the real intrigue came from the mystery. Rumors swirled about who the song was written about, and that speculation quietly fueled listener curiosity.
The song is about you, don't you, don't you?
Add in the unmistakable backing vocals from Mick Jagger, and the record had layers most audiences did not even realize were there at first. You can almost picture car radios turned up a little louder as listeners leaned in, trying to decode every lyric. Momentum snowballed week by week.
Don't you, don't you, don't you?
By early 1973, the song reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the most talked about records of the decade. And now we have reached the moment you have been waiting for, because the #1 comeback hit of the 1970s started with almost no expectations at all. Number 1, Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me by Gladys Knight and the Pips.
Life's ups and downs.
The slow riser that stole the decade. When this emotional powerhouse arrived in 1974 on Buddha Records, it did not explode out of the gate the way you might expect from such a beloved classic. Gladys Knight and the Pips were already seasoned hitmakers, but early radio response to this gentle ballad was surprisingly measured. In a mid-70s landscape packed with high-energy funk and disco, this tender confession had to earn its place the slow way. Behind the scenes, songwriter Jim Weatherly had already seen the song recorded by others, but it was Gladys Knight's rich, lived-in vocal that finally gave the record its full emotional weight. Even so, some programmers initially wondered whether the track was simply too restrained to compete with louder releases dominating the dial. You can almost feel the quiet intimacy of a late-night slow dance, the room dim, the music wrapping around the moment like velvet. Once audiences connected, the climb was steady and undeniable. The single reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the group's most enduring signature songs. From slow burners to dance floor takeovers, the 1970s proved that sometimes the biggest hits need a little time to find their moment. Thanks for joining us on this soul stroll. Subscribe to keep the groove alive and never miss our next stroll. And when you are ready for more, click the end screen to watch our previous countdown, 15 flop R&B songs from the 80s that unexpectedly turned into smash hits, and keep the rhythm rolling.